Chapter 8 Sex and Marriage. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Ephesians 5:31. We could not talk about marriage without talking about sex, but the subject of how sex relates to marriage has two levels to it. The foundational level, we need to understand the basic principle of biblical sex ethic. Why does God confine sexual activity exclusively to married couples? Then once we understand and receive the biblical reasoning, how do we live practically in accordance with it as Christians? Whether as single persons or as married couples, sex is just an appetite. No, it's not. Historically, there have been countless attitudes about sex. First, there is sex as a natural appetite. This goes something like this. Sex, it is said, once surrounded by taboos, but now we realize that sex is indeed like eating or like any other good and natural appetite. This means we should feel free to fulfill the appetite when we feel the need. And there is no reason why we shouldn't sample a variety of cuisines and continually look for new taste sensations. Forbidding the satisfaction of a natural appetite for limiting it for years is as unhealthy and really as impossible as trying to stop eating for years. Another view of sex is more negative, and it has deep roots in some form of ancient thought. Sex is seen as part of our lower physical nature, distinct from higher rational, more spiritual nature. In this view, sex is a degrading, dirty thing, a necessary evil for the propagation of the human race. This view is still very influential in the world. Today, a third view is also prominent. While the first view sees sex as unavoidable drive and the second as a necessary evil, the last view sees sex as a critical form of self-expression, a way to be yourself and find yourself. In this view, the individual may wish to use sex within marriage and to build a family, and that is up to the individual. Sex is primarily for an individual's fulfillment and self-realization. However, he or she wishes to pursue it. The biblical attitude towards sex is popularly thought to be the second view, sex as demeaning and dirty, but it is most definitely not. It differs quite radically from each of these other understandings. Is sex just an appetite? Yes, it is an appetite, but it is not in the same category as our need for food and sleep. Indeed, those desires cannot simply be gratified, whatever their level of intensity. Most people struggle to discipline their eating because their appetite for food is seriously out of line with what their bodies really need. The sex drive, however, needs more guidance. Sex affects our heart, our inward being, not just our body. Sin, which is the first and foremost a disorder of the heart, therefore has a big impact on sex. Our passions and desires for sex are very distorted. Sex is for whole life self-giving. However, the sinful heart wants to use sex for selfish reasons, not self-giving, and therefore the Bible puts many rules around it to direct us to use it in the right way. The Christian sex ethic can be summarized like this. Sex is used within marriage between a man and a woman. Sex is dirty? No, it's not. Is sex dirty and demeaning, as others have said? No. Biblical Christianity may be the most body-positive religion in the world. It teaches that God made matter and physical bodies and saw that it was all good. It says that in Jesus Christ, God himself actually took on the human body, which he still has in glorified form, and that someday he is going to give us all perfect resurrected bodies. It says that God created sexuality and gave a woman and man to each other in the beginning. The Bible contains great love poetry and celebrates sexual passion and pleasure. If anyone says that sex is bad or dirty in itself, we have the entire Bible to contradict him. God not only allows sex within marriage, but strongly commands it. In the book of Proverbs, husbands are encouraged to let their wives' breasts fill them with delight and be intoxicated by their sexual love. The book Song of Solomon does much barefaced rejoicing in the delights of sexual love in marriage. Old Testament scholar Tremper Longman writes, "The role of the woman throughout the Song of Solomon is truly astounding, especially in the light of its ancient origins. It is the woman, not the man, who is the dominant voice throughout the poem that make up songs. She is the one who seeks, pursues, and initiates. In Songs 5:10-16, she boldly claims her physical attraction. His abdomen is like polished ivory decorated with sapphires. Most English translations hesitate in this verse. The Hebrew is quite erotic, and most translators cannot bring themselves to bring out the obvious meaning. This is the prelude to their lovemaking. There is no shy, shamed, mechanical movement, but under the sheets, rather the two stand before each other, aroused, feeling no shame, but only joy in each other's sexuality. The Bible is a very uncomfortable book for the prudish. Sex is strictly a private matter. No, it's not. Is sex, however, primarily a means of individual happiness and fulfillment? No, but that doesn't mean sex is not about joy, or that it is only about duty. The Christian teaching is that sex is primarily a way to know God and build community. And if you use it for those things rather than for your own personal satisfaction, it will lead to greater fulfillment than you can imagine. The first explicit mention of sex in the Bible is in the famous passage Genesis 2:24, quoted as Paul by Ephesians 5. Male and female are to be united, to become one flesh. When first reading this phrase in English, it appears to be talking only about physical sexual union. But while the words do not mean less than that, they mean much more. When the Bible says that all flesh had corrupted their way on earth, or that God would pour out his Spirit on all flesh, it did not mean that only bodies were sinning or that God was giving his Spirit to all bodies. Rather, he was giving his Spirit to all people. Flesh is a synodote, a figure of speech in which a part of a thing is used to represent the whole, as in a phrase counting noses. In other words, marriage is a union between two people so profound that they virtually become a new single person. The word united, in older translations, to cleave, means to make a binding covenant or contract. This covenant brings every aspect of two persons living together. They essentially merge into a single legal, social, economic unit. They lose much of their independence. In love, they donate themselves wholly to one another. To call their marriage one flesh, that means that sex is understood as both a sign of that personal, legal union and a means to accomplish it. The Bible says, don't unite with someone physically unless you are willing to unite with the person emotionally, personally, socially, economically, and legally. Don't become physically naked and vulnerable to the other person without becoming vulnerable in every other way, because you have given up your freedom and bound yourself in marriage. Then once you have given yourself in marriage, sex is a way of maintaining and deepening that union as the years go by. In the Old Testament, there were often covenant renewal ceremonies. When God entered into a covenant relationship with his people, he directed that periodically there be an opportunity to have them remember the terms of the covenant by first reading it together and then recommitting themselves to it. This is crucial if the people were to sustain lifelong a life of faithfulness. It is the same with the marriage covenant. When you get married, you make a solemn covenant with your spouse. The Bible calls your spouse your covenant partner. The day is a great day, and your hearts are full, but as time goes on, there is a need to rekindle the heart and renew the commitment. There must be an opportunity to recall all that the other person means to you and give yourself anew. Sex between a husband and a wife is a unique way to do that. Indeed, sex is perhaps the most powerful God-created way to help you give your entire life to another human being. Sex is God-appointed way for two people to reciprocally say to one another, I belong completely, permanently, and exclusively to you. You must not use sex to say anything less. So according to the Bible, a covenant is necessary for sex. It creates a place of security for vulnerability and intimacy, but through a marriage covenant is necessary for sex. Sex is also necessary for maintenance of the covenant. It is your covenant renewal service. One biblical author who was popularly thought to have a negative view of sex is St. Paul. Yet a closer look at what Paul actually says makes that hard to support. In 1 Corinthians 6:17, Paul forbids Christians from having sex with a prostitute, but the reasoning he gives is remarkable. Do you not know that a person who is united in intimacy with a prostitute is one with her? For as it is said, the two shall become one flesh. Keep away from sexual immorality, for you do not belong to yourself. You were bought with a price. Show forth God's glory, then, in how you live your bodily life. What does this mean? Clearly, one flesh means something different to Paul than mere sexual union, or Paul would be reciting a mere tautology. Don't you know that when you have physical union with a prostitute, you are having physical union? What? You are having physical union with a prostitute. Obviously, Paul also understands becoming one flesh here to mean becoming one person. One flesh refers to the personal union of a man and woman at all levels of their lives. Paul then is decrying the monstrosity of physical oneness without all the other kinds of oneness that every sex act should mirror. D.S. Bailey, who wrote the magisterial The Man-Woman Relation in Christian Thought, argues how groundbreaking and unprecedented the New Testament of Pauline's view of sex was in the history of human thought. Here, Paul's thought owes nothing to the antecedent notion and displays a psychological insight into human sexuality which is altogether exceptional by first-century standards. The apostle denies that coitus is no more than an appropriate exercise of the genital organs. Coitus? On the contrary, he insists that it is an act which engages and expresses the whole personality in such a way as to constitute a unique mode of self-disclosure and self-commitment. In short, according to Paul, sex with a prostitute is wrong because every sex act is supposed to be a uniting act. Paul insists it is radically dissonant to give your body to someone to whom you will not also commit your whole life. C.S. Lewis likens sex without marriage to tasting food without swallowing and digesting. The analogy is apt. Sex is a commitment apparatus. The modern sexual revolution finds the idea of abstinence from sex till marriage to be so unrealistic as to be ludicrous. In fact, many people believe it is psychologically unhealthy and harmful. Yet despite contemporary incredulity, this has been unquestioned, uniform teaching of not only one but all of the Christian churches, Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant. The Bible does not counsel sexual abstinence before marriage because it is such a low view of sex, but because it has such a lofty one. The biblical view implies that sex outside of marriage is not just morally wrong, but also personally harmful. If sex is designed to be part of making a covenant and experiencing that covenant's renewal, then we should think of sex as an emotional commitment apparatus. Let's see how many more pages do I have. Probably stop there and then start another one.